All right, Mel.
Go ahead.
Okay, Mel.
Greetings. My name is Melvin Hardy. I am a member of the Hiroshima Nagasaki Peace Committee of the National Capital Area. And together we bring you greetings to a worldwide audience who have both influenced and been influenced by the Hiroshima Nagasaki Peace Committee of Washington. The important issues, we will listen to our presenters make the linkage between nuclear weapons abolition, issues of disarmament and nonproliferation, and the struggle for economic and social justice seeking and social justice making. And in this, we honor all of the hibakusha around the world, those who have been influenced and affected by radiation issues in their lives, and all those who work in the cause of human flourishing and human betterment. My personal entry point to the matters of nuclear weapons abolition is when John Steinbeck and the Hiroshima Nagasaki Peace Committee visited All Souls Church in 2002, where I happened to have been the administrator of the church. At that time, I was asked to present to the Japanese visitors with HNC to show them the Hiroshima children's drawings. These were very well known to our Japanese visitors. From the time of the gift that was bequeathed, was delivered to All Souls Church as a result of compassion delivered by the church to the Hankawa Elementary School. These important cultural artifacts, this cultural material, is so important, and we at All Souls Church are honored to be stewards of this material. They have been shown in Hiroshima, and a documentary film that has been award-winning has been produced about the story of the Hiroshima children's drawings. That story will be shown on public television in the fall. And HNDC has been a major catalyst in all of this work, and I am pleased to serve on this committee. With that, please allow me to introduce you to Mr. John Steinbach, who will provide both the context and the history of the Hiroshima Nagasaki Peace Committee of the National Capital Area. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mel. For the historical record and for ease of interpretation for our Japanese participants, I'm going to read the history. The Hiroshima Nagasaki Peace Committee of the National Capital Area, the HN Peace Committee, was established in 1981 to remember the anniversary of the atomic bombings each August, to support the hibakusha, the living survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and radiation survivors worldwide, and to work to abolish nuclear weapons for the benefit of. The committee emphasizes the deadly connection between nuclearism and militarism and the importance of linking disarmament struggle for economic, environmental, and social justice. Today, the Hiroshima Peace Committee is respected around the world for its uncompromising support for radiation survivors, opposition to nuclear power, and commitment to nuclear abolition. The HN Peace Committee had its roots in the disarmament movement of the late 50s and 1960s, especially Women's Strike for Peace. Louise Franklin Ramirez, a longtime peace and justice activist and an organizer and participant in the first Women's Strike for Peace, joined with activists from the Washington Peace Center, clergy and laity concerned, and other DC area groups to organize Hiroshima and Nagasaki commemorations throughout the 1960s and 70s, often linking them with opposition to the Vietnam War. In the late 1970s, the A-bomb commemorations, increasingly organized by Louise, had become an annual affair. In 1981, Louise, Josephine Butler, Arjun Makajani, John Steinbach, and others formed the ad hoc Hiroshima-Nagasaki Peace Committee and organized the first national Hiroshima-Nagasaki commemoration at the Lincoln Memorial. On August 9th, 1981, several hundred activists gathered to, quote, put nuclear war and weapons on trial, with Louise leading the successful prosecution. Among the speakers was Arjun Makajani, who read his moving poem, Hiroshima Mirror. In the aftermath of the successful commemoration, a consensus among peace and justice activists and organizations was reached that a permanent Hiroshima-Nagasaki Peace Committee be established. Thus was born the Hiroshima-Nagasaki Peace Committee of the National Capital Area. For the next 40 years, the committee continued to organize annual August commemorations. We developed a close relationship with Nihon Hidankyo, the Confederation of A and H bomb sufferers organizations, and with their coordination hosted hundreds of hibakusha. The committee worked with local and national organizations to help organize dozens of protests. We played a major role in supporting the hibakusha attending the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference every 5 years. We sent many delegations to participate in the World Conference Against A&H Bombs, including approximately 10 youth delegates. And we did all this as an all-volunteer organization supported by the community. Some of the highlights over the years are, in 1982, we organized the first showing in the United States of the film Prophecy, which included Technicolor footage of the atomic bombings. Also in 1982, the committee organized the U.S. premiere showing of If You Love This Planet, a Canadian film about Helen Caldicott. In defiance of a ban imposed by the Reagan administration, the committee showed the movie at Church of the Reformation on Capitol Hill to a large audience. 1982-83, the committee showed the documentary Half-Life by Dennis O'Rourke that proved that the first thermonuclear test, Bravo, was timed to deliberately contaminate the people and the land of Rongelap and Utrecht Islands. 1982 again, under the leadership of Reverend Herbert Daughtry, the committee helped organize over 30 buses to the June 12th disarmament rally in New York City. We organized under Reverend Daughtry's Progressive and Third World People's Caucus. 1983, the committee organized a colorful die-in for peace attended by several hundred activists. The die-in was part of the Refuse the Cruise and Pershing II protest organized to oppose Reagan's nuclear buildup. In 1983, the committee organized a reception for a Nihon Hidankyo hibakusha delegation led by Professor Satoru Konishi. Professor Konishi was the international secretary of Hidankyo and was largely responsible for organizing hibakusha delegations worldwide. Konishi-san and I became close personal friends over the next 25 years until his death several years ago. 1984, The committee played a central role in organizing the April Actions for Peace, one of the first major peace and disarmament actions organized and led primarily by people of color. In 1985, a member organization of Mobilization for Survival, the Hiroshima-Nagasaki Peace Committee, hosted 4 hibakusha, the first of the many delegations to visit the national capital area. In addition, the committee played a major role in organizing the ribbon around the Pentagon. In 1987, the committee showed the documentary Radium City by Carol Langer that told the story of the radium watchdial women painters and their terrible fate. 1990, the committee sent the first of many delegations to participate in the World Conference Against ANH Bombs. And we actually probably sent a couple of delegations before that. 1995, the committee, in partnership with Peace Action, organized the delegation of about 20 hibakusha who visited about 10 states in the Midwest, South, Mid-Atlantic, and Northeast. Our organizer, Yuki Sato, who is on the call today, worked out of a Peace Action office to organize all of those hibakusha. I believe that was probably the largest delegation of visiting hibakusha to give testimony that ever happened in 1995. In the spring of 95, the committee was instrumental in the rediscovery of the world famous Honkawa School children's drawings at All Souls Church. The committee in 1999 sent the first of 10 or 11 youth delegates to the World Conference, to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The purpose of our youth delegate programs was to expose young people to the worldwide anti-nuclear movement and especially the hibakusha. 2003 to 2004. The committee was a member of a group of historians, activists, and community leaders called the Committee for a National Discussion of Nuclear History and Current Policy, formed to challenge a proposed exhibit of the Enola Gay, the plane used to drop the A-bomb on Hiroshima. A letter signed by hundreds of prominent individuals asking for a balanced exhibit and a national conference about the atomic bombings was sent to the Smithsonian. When the Smithsonian refused to meet with the committee, plans to protest the exhibit commenced. Over 10,000 signers hand-delivered a petition to the Smithsonian. 2005. In the spring of 2005, the committee organized 2 public receptions at First AME Church and University of DC for Japanese peace activists and hibakusha. This was organized by the Gensuikyo organization. I remember they had 2 or 3 buses and we did a number of events with them. And in later years, we also hosted several other Gensuikyo delegations. We also organized a bus to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference. That's the NPT Review Conference at the UN. In 2005, in August, the committee sent a delegation of 8 persons to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, led by Rick Tingling Clemens and Reverend Phil Wheaton. The delegation included 2 American radiation survivors, Lori Goodman from the Navajo Nation, representing the Navajo uranium miners, and Dennis Nelson from St. George, Utah. 2010, Kiyo Kanda and John Steinbach, volunteering on behalf of the committee, were the primary organizers of over 100 volunteer interpreters and bilingual volunteers in preparation for the 2010 NPT Review Conference. During the conference, the committee helped organize a program for what was the largest gathering of hibakusha ever held outside Japan. 2013, the committee welcomed Setsuko Thurlow, an old friend who is a Hiroshima survivor appointed by the government of Japan as a special communicator for a world without nuclear weapons. In 2017, she jointly accepted the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo on behalf of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. In 2013, with the DC Labor Chorus, we organized a U.S.-Japan Friendship Concert at the Sam Abbott Center. So that's a brief history of the committee. I just want to say that we could not have organized all that we did over the many, many years without the support of the community and the support of hundreds and perhaps thousands of volunteers. And of course, without the help and the support of our allies in Japan, Nihon Hidankyo Gensuikyo, Japan Peace Committee, and other organizations. So, you know, as we reflect back on 40 years, remember that what we had over the last 40 years is the result of all of our efforts. And I want to personally thank everyone on behalf of the committee for pulling together and helping us do that. Thank you. So I'm going to take over hosting duties temporarily because I know everybody here is a friend of mine. So it makes sense for me to recognize them. So the first person I'm going to recognize to give the occasion of the 40th anniversary is Arjun Makajani. And Arjun and I were young Gray Panthers when we first started this. And Arjun is the director of the Institute for Environmental and Energy and Research. He's written many books. I have most of Arjun's, if not all of Arjun's books on my bookshelf, but my very favorite book that Arjun ever wrote as a young man, and I think his first book was a critique of capitalism and how capitalism was not going to be able to address the problems that we face, including the threat of nuclear annihilation. So I don't want to take up Arjun's time, but just to say that we would not have the committee as it is today had it not been for the effort of Arjun and Josephine Butler and Louise Franklin Ramirez. So Arjun, will you say a few words, please?
You're muted. You're muted.
Yeah. And John Steinbach, of course, who was also a founder of the committee. And thank you, John, for organizing this event. Commemorating the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the capital, the place of the United States, the place where the decision was made to make and use the bomb remains critically important. 40 years ago, I was a volunteer for the Washington, D.C. Gray Panthers, where I met Louise and John and Josephine. And we also participated at that time, I should recall, in the statehood for D.C., a matter still not accomplished, like nuclear disarmament. I love the age and youth in action motto of the Gray Panthers, especially the action part, and the fact that it wasn't only about issues of elderly people like Social Security or Medicare, but included peace and disarmament, healthcare for all. 40 years ago, as John said, I was on the youth side of the age and youth in action. That has changed, of course, like so much else. But some things are still the same, like the danger of nuclear weapons and nuclear war, whether deliberate or accidental, it's still high. In fact, it's growing, as you all know, as it was in the early 1980s when we formed the committee. This time it is largely, though not only, about US-China tensions. And today is the anniversary of the first atomic explosion, the so-called Trinity test in New Mexico. It brought radioactivity down on the people over a wide area. Even after the war ended, they were not told that they had been exposed to radiation and put at risk. 76 years later, they have yet to receive any official recognition of the harm that was done to them. And the community is still struggling for that recognition. The same type of bomb was used to destroy Nagasaki a few weeks later. People were harmed by radioactivity even before the Trinity test. The process for uranium metal production was developed at the Ames laboratory in Iowa from 1942 onward. There were frequent chemical explosions, not nuclear, I want to stress, chemical explosions from the reaction of making uranium metal. And it put uranium dust in the air, which is radioactive, and workers breathed it. Uranium metal was produced on an industrial scale using that process in downtown St. Louis, Missouri, during the Manhattan Project and afterwards. And the same kinds of accidents happened there, exposing workers and neighbors of the plant. This is downtown St. Louis. That uranium metal was used to make the plutonium at Hanford that was eventually used in the Nagasaki bomb, which was made in Los Alamos, as you know. Plutonium separation in late 1944 and 1945 at Hanford and Washington State released a great amount of radioactivity, including iodine-131, which causes thyroid cancer and affected both workers and people nearby. This is 44 and 45. There was an experimental aspect to the targeting of Japanese cities that I want to call attention to. The questions the scientists were seeking to answer, among others, were, would a devastating bomb delivered by a single plane produce more terror in the population than, say, the firebombing by hundreds and hundreds of planes that had been going on in World War II? What kind of damage would the bombs do? To determine that, the project said that some cities should not be targeted with conventional weapons, so that the effect of the bombs on those cities could be more accurately measured. The Target Committee's criteria are worth quoting. This is a quote from the Target Committee. While the bombs should not concentrate on civilian areas, they should seek to make a profound psychological impression, as profound a psychological impression as possible. The most desirable target would be a vital war plant employing a large number of workers and closely surrounded by workers' houses, unquote. It doesn't say that, but presumably the families of workers would also live in those houses. So the idea that, not concentrating on civilian areas, well, that kind of makes me skeptical about how serious that was, because targeting houses means families. It is remarkable that every nuclear armed state has harmed its own people in the process of making and testing nuclear weapons, and done so without informed consent. United States is not alone in this regard, certainly. The Soviet Union, China, France, Britain, India, Pakistan, all of them. I want to give one example that stands out for me. From around 1950, scientists at Hanford discovered that iodine-131 deposited on grass from fallout would concentrate in milk in the cows that were grazing on that grass. The Atomic Energy Commission knew, therefore, when it started testing in Nevada that, fallout would cover the country, and some or much of the milk supply of the country would get contaminated due to the testing, and it did. But the AEC did nothing to warn the people or to protect the milk supply during atmospheric testing in Nevada throughout the 50s and the early 60s. Girl children, we know now, were especially vulnerable to thyroid cancer. And people who lived in the countryside drinking fresh milk, especially on farms. I've been to many of these areas where people, looking back, realized that their thyroid problems and cancers might have been because they thought they were living the healthy life on farms and drinking fresh milk. Fresh milk, of course, was more dangerous because there was more iodine-131 in it. The government has estimated in the 1990s, US government, that tens of thousands of people contracted thyroid cancer as a result of fallout from Nevada testing. Fallout, of course, has been a global problem, and there is still radioactivity in the environment from that fallout, but not iodine-131, which has decayed away. In that same period, photographic film was being packaged in straw board, made out of straw from agricultural residues. Fallout made the straw radioactive, and that straw board then fogged the film. Kodak threatened to sue the government because it knew what was going on. It ran Oak Ridge, Eastman Company ran Oak Ridge during the war. The AEC warned Kodak and the photographic film industry and gave them advanced data on expected fallout patterns so they could protect their film supply. But they did not do anything to protect the milk supply. I find this example especially exemplifying the very deadly character of nuclear weapons in a very intimate way. We have to work with creativity and passion to eliminate nuclear weapons. It's a job, really, it's a huge job, but there is new hope, as you know, in the form of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which came into force this year. And that is truly a wonderful change. Nuclear weapons are illegal now under international law. I am especially honored that Setsuko Tarlo-san is here today. She has made so many amazing, inspiring, and courageous contributions to the cause of eliminating nuclear weapons, including, a major role in helping bring the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons into reality. And it's up to us to work on that and make that a reality for make nuclear weapons elimination a reality. I want to end with that poem that John mentioned, but I want to say a little bit about how I came by it. It's really the story of a hibakusha I heard on the radio. She described how the bomb had melted the flesh on her face, and how she felt ugly and fearful that no one would love her. Her story exemplified the special and terrible discrimination and misogyny that women hibakusha have faced over and above the suffering caused by the bomb itself. Her story moved me deeply, and I set it to, made a short poem really closely connected to that story, which I read 40 years ago. I want to end my talk today by reading that poem in the hope that the terrible sadness it represents will inspire us to work harder to eliminate nuclear weapons so that that kind of sadness and that kind of loneliness never happens again. So the poem is Hiroshima Mirror. I spent hours alone before the mirror. I saw ugly craters, seeping lava of flesh, hunks of my face, eyes and lips no lovers would meet. Thank you.
Thank you, Arjun. So I'd like people to refer to the comment section. So if you have memories or thoughts or anything you want to say, put them in the comments, because we're going to save the comments. I'm going to reformat them. We'll have all of the statements that you're hearing. We will have the video, and we'll be saving that on the Hiroshima Peace Committee website. So please go there, make your comments.
In the chat,
In the chat, yes, in the chat. Thank you, Ellen. So we're note to the interpreters. We're going to diverge very briefly from the program because we have two individuals that have to leave early. So they're going to be speaking briefly. First of all, I'd like to recognize Mark Rabinowitz, who was an early member of the committee, a friend of many of us, and who is still active out in Oregon. So, Mark, would you like to give some words for us? You unmute. Is Mark on, Jonah? Okay.
I didn't see his
All
name.
right, so let's move forward. I want to introduce Reverend Herbert Daughtry. He's going to talk about the story about how he first got involved. But I want to give Reverend Daughtry credit for for stepping up, particularly on June 12th, but before that and after that, in terms of insisting that people of color, African Americans, people of color, poor people, have a say in organizing against nuclear weapons and a say in the movement, because unfortunately then, and to a degree still today, the movement is dominated by white activists. And Reverend Daughtry stood up in 1982, and we worked with him to do our small part in rectifying that situation. So Reverend Daughtry, you're one of my heroes, and I want you to say a few words about this connection between the committee and you, the National Black United Front.
Thank you. Thank you, John, for your kind words. And you played not a small role, indeed, a monumental role in what we were doing at the time, as I shall note presently. But first of all, what an impressive list of accomplishments of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki Peace Committee. My gracious. And we thank you very much. And to the prior speaker, Melvin Hardy and Arjun, we thank you for the information and the education that you provided for us. Honorable sirs, madam, as the emeritus of the National Presiding Prelate of the House of the Lord Churches and the chairman of the National Black United Front, and at present founding president of the Herbert Daughtry Global Ministries, with profound praise and appreciation and gratitude, I wish to convey our congratulations to the Hiroshima and Nagasaki Peace Committee on their 40th anniversary. For 4 decades, you have neither faltered nor failed to build the vision of your founders, Luis Franklin Ramirez and Josephine Baird Butler. Quote, let us work unceasingly to establish a just peace, to oppose militarism, and to completely dismantle all nuclear weapons, that the world's children be free of the threat of nuclear war and share and enjoy the beneficent and bountiful future, close quote. Let me say at this point, we, the Herbert Daughtry Global Ministries, share the vision of your founders. We work, we advocate, and we pray for a world in which all enjoy freedom, justice, and equality, where there is equality in education, health services, and meaningful employment for all, in a world of sustainable energy, nuclear disarmament, and peace between nations and individuals. The world is indebted to you for all that you've done and are doing. I tremble to think where we humans would be, if in fact we would be at all, if there had not been no Hiroshima, Nagasaki Peace Committee, and like-minded organizations and individuals who have been in the struggle for these many, many years and have declared that they will be in the struggle until the end, especially with all of the emphasis I can command on behalf of the Third World Progressive Committee. We owe you, and we deeply are indebted to you, to this committee, for supporting us at a critical time in history. In 1981 and 82, when world leaders were convening a great global demand for the disarmament of nuclear weapons. There were powerful racists who sought to block the participation of the National Black United Front, which I headed at the time. But because we had secured the permit for the sites that they wished to hold their demonstrations, they were forced to deal with us. We expanded our original group to include all so-called third world people. We named the group the Third World Progressive Committee and commenced the hard work of deepening and increasing our coalition. We became an integral part of the internal leadership of the International Disarmament Committee. We demanded and received 1/3 of all the Disarmament Committee's activities, i.e., 1/3 progressive people's participation in all of the program, 1/3 of the budget to use to promote what was happening, et cetera, et cetera. I called John Steinbach and asked him to arrange a meeting for me to speak to the Washington, D.C. area, Hiroshima, Nagasaki. To the eternal credit of John, he effectuated my request. We journeyed to Washington, D.C. I spoke to the members of the group. I gave them an update on what was happening in the International Disarmament Committee and how we were organizing. The HNPC wholeheartedly endorsed our effort and became members of our Third World Progressive Committee and helped us do our organizing work. For the event itself, June 12, 1982, they brought, as John has indicated, 30 busloads to New York. The event will always be remembered as the greatest peace disarmament rally ever held. Over 1 million people from across the world came to New York for the disarmament rallies and demonstrations. By the count was recorded by local news media outlets. I spoke twice, first at the United Nations, then we marched to Central Park, where we continued the rally. And again, I was asked to address the rally. And I want to, in conclusion, I want to make a proposal that we commence organizing immediately for next year's 40th anniversary of the greatest nuclear disarmament rally ever held. Well, may God bless our efforts and allow us to see the day in the words of the Holy Scriptures of the Christian faith. Quote, God shall judge between the nations and shall arbitrate for many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nations shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they study war anymore, close quote. And then the words of our people used to sing, I'm going to lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside. But we're not going to lay it down just yet. We urge the nations to lay down their sword and shield down by the riverside, study war no more. Thank you, John, and all of the people listening.
Thank you, Reverend Daughtry. So, a note to the interpreters. We're going to go back to the order again, and we're going to be hearing from our partners, Nihon Hidankyo, the Confederation of Japanese A&H bomb survivors organizations. And so we're going to be hearing from the General Secretary, Suichi Kido, and also the International Secretary, Terumi Tanaka. And I have known both for many years and consider them my dear friends. So please, our Hidankyo guests.
have to unmute.
木戸さんから。
田中さんからでもいいよ。はい、はい、わかりました。ワシントン、広島、長崎平和委員会40周年記念イベント開催にあたり、
I want to send a warm greeting of friendship on the occasion of the 40th anniversary of Hiroshima Nagasaki Peace Committee of the National Capital Area. I was invited to Washington, D.C. in 2004 to give testimonies of my airborne experience. During my stay, Big John took a great care of me. Every morning he came to pick me up at the house where I was staying and took me home in the evening. And during the daytime, we were always together. Thank you so much, John, for your kind care and support. Since then, we met each other at many different occasions, including the NPT review conferences, international forums, and the World Conference Against NH bombs in Japan. My visit to Washington, D.C. in 2004 was full of revelations and moving experiences. I was moved to know that Louise sent a letter of protest to President Truman in 1945 for the atomic bombing and dedicated her entire life to the work of abolishing nuclear weapons.
発見は路上で、ワシントンの路上
And
で、
also the words of an old woman who was showing the airborne photographs on the street of Washington, D.C. also opened my eyes. She said, the meaning of the air bombing on Hiroshima is different from that on Nagasaki. Humans make original sin. Hiroshima air bombing was an original sin. But Nagasaki bombing is a crime that should not have committed. I was also amazed at unexpected and wonderful meetings with people during the visit. The first host family was a friend of my old classmate, and another host family was a person who regularly sent an essay to be carried on Shinano Mainichi newspaper, a local daily, in my hometown, in Gifu. The fellow hibakusha traveling with me were Mr. Kawano from Tokyo, Mr. Harada from Saitama, and Mr. Komine of Nagasaki. They were all unique in their personalities, and we had great fun together. Mr. Kawano would never forget a path once he took it and walked the street of Washington, D.C. with ease. That was incredible for me, who has no sense of direction. This year marks the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and the 65th anniversary of Nihon Hidankyo's founding. I pledge before you to dedicate the remaining years of my life to achieving a world without nuclear weapons or wars. Congratulations on the 40th anniversary of your committee's founding. Let us continue to work together with you. Thank you very much.
じゃあ、いいですかじゃあ、引き続き、田中照美、日本被団
Thank you
協
very much. I am Tanaka Terumi of Nihon Hidankyo, co-chair of Nihon Hidankyo. Congratulations on the 40th anniversary of the founding of Hiroshima Nagasaki Peace Committee. Thank you for inviting me to join you in this commemorative meeting. Some people talk about 1982. Nihon Hidankyo sent many hibakusha to the SSD-1, which was held before then. But in 1982, we sent 41 hibakusha delegates, and we joined the 1 million people's march in New York on Manhattan, and we walked together with you. That was a very impressive moment we had together. And John spoke about Konishi Satoru, who you contacted with since 1983. But as Hidankyo, I think it was in 1995 that Hidankyo and Hiroshima Nagasaki Peace Committee had the joint actions formally for the first time. That summer, the Enola Gay exhibition at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, which should have featured the photos of Hiroshima and Nagasaki airborne damage, was cancelled due to the opposition by veterans groups and some senators. The Nihon Hidankyo delegation, led by Konishi Satoru, joined the protest actions carried out by US peace groups. And I myself met John and Louise for the first time in the summer of 1996, when Hidankyo delegation was welcomed at the DC before we started the speaking tours in different parts of the US, as John said. And for almost 20 years since then, Hidankyo members were invited by the Peace Committee every year to give airborne testimonies to the people in the US. We highly appreciate the historic joint undertakings we had made possible by the enormous efforts of your committee and many US volunteers and Japanese citizens who helped us with accommodation and translation. And in 2003, I visited Washington, D.C. to join, I was privileged to join the memorial ceremony of Louise, who passed away on August the 6th that year. I remember Louise, frail, and had difficulty walking, but I had a great respect to Louise, who had a rich experience for a long time, commitment in the peace movement, and I learned a lot from her talking. And she was a forerunner of the struggle for gender equality. And in the memorial ceremony, I stayed in the Washington, D.C., and I had the opportunity to visit American University, Peter Kazanik, and also I met Mr. Aljon Makjani to discuss about the radioactivity, and also visited the National Office of Peace Action to have talks with the young activists there. And in 1998, I visited Washington again, when an annex of the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum was built next to the Dallas airport, where the fully refurbished Enola Gay was to be exhibited. 4 Hibakusha joined the rally, including me, and protest actions against the plan, which were held in the cold December days outdoors. And Mr. Yamada Hirotami of Nagasaki, who unfortunately passed away only recently, joined the symposium along with prominent academics and experts on the issue. They were very memorable activities we had together. During the almost 25 years of our joint works, many of the Hibakusha who were welcomed by your committee in Washington, D.C. have left us. More than half of them passed away. But on July the 7th, 2017, our efforts bore fruit in the adoption of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons at the United Nations. And with the 50 plus ratifications for the treaty, this TPNW entered into force on January the 22nd this year, the day which will go down in the history of the peace movement. But the nuclear armed states and their allies continue to oppose the TPNW, and it is truly deplorable to see Japan, the only A-bombed country in wartime, among them. With the TPNW, nuclear weapons were officially rendered illegal under international law, and their possession is now meaningless even as a means of deterrence. Now, in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, we are called to join forces beyond borders as one human community and to overcome the current difficulties. Abolition of nuclear weapons also must be achieved as the task of the whole humanity. Let us continue to work together to save the blue planet free of nuclear weapons or wars for future generations. Let us continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. I'd like to move ahead fairly quickly now and introduce Setsuko Thurlow. And Setsuko has been a friend of the committee since, I would say, for the last 30 years. She was a special guest in 2013. And Setsuko, I'd like you to unmute yourself and to say a few words, please. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Hello, everybody. I'm talking to you, reaching out to you from Toronto, Canada. That's my home. Well, John advised me to speak from the heart, just look back and enjoy the nostalgia. I was on, I think I trusted his words. I just made outlines and I thought I would just share with you some of the memories I have had with you in your beautiful city. But first of all, I would like to say that what your committee has meant to many hibakshas and activists from Japan, from Canada, from other places. What you have offered, such a warm, accepting, kind people you brought together and you welcomed us to this city. And I have always considered your people as my friends and your group as my home. Thank you for having provided us such a wonderful, warm place for us for the past so many years in the past. I guess that's the main thing I wanted to say. But I would like to spend the next few minutes just to remember some of the highlights of my visit to this city and a very personal recollection of my people. Well, I first met Louise and John in Tokyo, I think, and then in Hiroshima. I think that was the latter part of 70s. When was it when you first went to Japan? Anyway, that's when I met you both in Japan. And I was quite impressed by the total dedication both of you had to the cause. I was so impressed also by your wonderful marriage. You were so devoted to each other, so caring, so supportive, so helpful. And that was wonderful role model you showed us to Japanese. And well, allow me to remember some of the things. Let me see. Right. Oh, yes. The first time I visited Washington, I think I was with my husband. I do have a picture of you giving us the welcome party. And thank you so much for that. And then another occasion I remember is when I was invited by Sidwell Friends School in Washington. John was very helpful. He supported me. Well, I got a letter and from the student body of that school and invited me to come and speak, and together with Mr. Sam Walker. And who is Mr. Sam Walker? I made a quick check. My goodness, I think he was the director of National Institute of Energy or something like that. I don't remember. Wow, was he historian? Well, I didn't know anything. And then I thought, oh, it doesn't sound very nice just to have a panel with a man like that. I wanted somebody on my side too. And at that time, Peter, I didn't know you then when living in Washington. Now I know you are here. I would ask you about that. So I looked around and I thought of Kai Bird. He's a historian, isn't he? I thought he could be supportive to us. So Kai Bird and Sam Walker and I, the students organized this event. And actually, I was very impressed by this school. Students are so bright, energetic, ready, eager to learn. And I guess they appreciated my very frank, open expression because they gave me standing ovation. Kai said, oh, he had never seen that kind of reaction from the young people. He was very happy about that. But I do remember at the end, and we had a bit of Q&A, and well, Mr. Walker kept saying how great that bomb did it, that ended the war. I thought that was strange. Oh, if he's historian, he should know better. And then I wanted to oppose to that. And I explained that no, Russians' participation and what they did in Manchuria and so forth and so forth. He wouldn't accept my opinion. And I was rather upset about that. Anyway, I do remember those things, happy things as well as very upsetting memories. Anyway, another time I came to Washington and you helped us, 2 delegates from Hidankyo, 2 gentlemen, and I came from Canada, and it was to attend the international, what is that? Not the committee campaign, international something of nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. And that was the meeting of about 16 nations represented by ministerial level of people. And United States was represented by William Perry. He's a retired former Minister or Secretary of Defense, isn't that right? He was there, and the foreign ministers from Australia and Japan and so forth. And I think we were to make the testimony. And the night before the meeting, the Japanese embassy entertained us with a dinner. I sat together at the same table with Mr. Perry. But I was quite impressed. He was, he was not like the leaders I used to meet, the people who consider themselves the high priest of secret nuclear information. They are the only one who knows it. We lowly people don't know. And that was often the kind of attitude those leaders have. But this gentleman was different, very humble. Oh, okay. All right. I get the signal. So anyway, all right. Anyway, at that time, he impressed me as a very humble person who spoke to me. I look forward to hearing your personal testimony tomorrow morning at the meeting. Wow, I haven't had that kind of treatment from high-ranking officials. But anyway, all right, I'll then, as John mentioned, there was one year, was it 83, 2013, did you say? You invited me to speak at the annual commemorative meeting. I think you had it at the outside, and one of the speakers was a young high school student from Maryland. Anyway, okay, I will jump, I'm sorry. Okay, but I just want to remember some of the special experiences I have had, maybe curiously like, but I remember we had a vigil, late night vigil by White House. That was quite memorable. And you drove me around and I met with a group of women in black. I never met that group, and that was quite an experience. And also you arranged a homestay with a WILF member in Virginia. That was interesting. And I remember visiting the Smithsonian Institute and looked at that huge aircraft. And the guide was telling me all the glorious things, how efficient, effective that aircraft did. And he wouldn't listen to us. But I was together with the group of people who are members of the Catholic Workers. I don't know the exact name of the organization, but they were Catholics. And after we left Smithsonian and out in the parking lot, I think it was, we all knelt down. We had the prayer meeting, and they were, okay. Yes, I see you, John. I'm long-winded, okay. Anyway, and you took me to George Brown University. I met some members from veterans, I think, who are actively involved in. So my time in Washington was always packed, every minute. He arranged meetings with wonderful people who are totally committed to shared goals. So I did my part. I spoke at universities, high school kids, and I had a great time. But I was always so impressed that you have so successfully recruited totally dedicated volunteers. And those volunteers were very helpful. They took me to the Library of Congress and all the places I wanted to visit. So, as well as the work, I met wonderful people, I made friends, and I enjoy my touristy like interests as well.
Excuse me, Setsuko,
Yes.
thank you for your comments. We
Okay.
need to get other people a chance to
Okay,
speak,
fine.
so thank you very
Okay.
much.
So thank you. I guess that's the main thing I want to say. You gave me wonderful home to visit, wonderful friends to visit, and rich, exciting experiences in your city. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Setsuko.
Thank you. Thank you, Setsuko. Thank you very, very much.
Yes, these are all really good memories.
Yes.
So I want to move on, and because I want to get everybody in. So I think I'm going to ask Professor Peter Koznig, director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at American University, also an old friend of Setsuko's, and she mentioned him. So Peter, would you say a few words? Peter and the committee have been, I would say, working in partnership the better part of 30 years. I think that's safe. Peter. Is Peter there? Peter, unmute.
Let me try to start again. Let me first say Ohio gozaimasu to my friends in Japan. Setsuko mentioned Kai Bird. Well, I had dinner with Kai Bird last night and with Marty Sherwin and Gar Alperovitz,
Oh my.
3 pioneers of among nuclear historians, maybe the 3 of the best. Sam Walker was not at our dinner.
Good.
But it's so nice to see so many old friends here, most of whom I've met through John and through the committee. Before I start talking about what I was going to talk about, John asked me to say a few words about another anniversary. Arjun mentioned that this is the 76th anniversary of the Trinity test, but there was another important anniversary that occurred on July 16th. The 2 German physicists, Hahn and Strassmann, split the uranium atom in late 1938. And word came to scientists in the United States in January of 1939, and they immediately understood that this meant the possibility of developing nuclear weapons. But the Americans were not that interested. The ones who were concerned were the émigré scientists who had escaped from Nazi-occupied Europe and settled here in the United States. And they were terrified at the prospect of Hitler developing a bomb. So Leo Szilard and Eugene Wigner rented a car or borrowed a car and drove out to Peconic, Long Island to see Albert Einstein, who was vacationing in Peconic that summer on July 16th, 1939. And Einstein was working on the unified field theory. He didn't even know that the Germans had split the uranium atom 8 months earlier. But when Szilard and Wigner laid this out to him, Einstein understood the implications, and so he signed the letter to President Roosevelt, urging the United States to begin the nuclear research project. Einstein later said, "I made one great mistake in my life, writing the letter to President Roosevelt." But there was some justification at the time. Actually, Einstein wrote 3 letters to Roosevelt, asking him to expedite the project later on. But the important lesson from that is not only that Einstein regretted it, but that the bomb project was begun not as a weapon of war, but as a deterrent against a German bomb. There was no thought given for years. Actually, it was Arjun who finally discovered some of the documents for years about using it against Japan, which we knew could not develop atomic bombs. But that's another story that I'm not going to get into today. But I met John back in the late 1980s, and I was teaching at American University. I began teaching there in 1986. My dissertation had been on the politicization and radicalization of American scientists in the 1930s. And I was interested in the fact that the scientists so readily went into the Manhattan Project, and that was because they were in the leadership of the anti-fascist movement in the United States in the 1930s. And they were terrified, like the émigré physicists, that the Germans would get atomic bombs and use them. Hitler would use them against the United States and the rest of the world. So my first book was about that, and that led directly into my interest about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I'd long been active in the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement, so I was very concerned about nuclear issues. And John found me, and we began to collaborate together. And I was teaching classes like one called Living with the Bomb, American Culture in the Nuclear Age, and doing a lot of lecturing on nuclear issues. And so in 1995, I was involved in the protests against the Enola Gay exhibit at the Air and Space Museum. During that summer, one of my students and I, Kika Neono, and I decided that we were going to do something special to commemorate the 50th anniversary. Akiko was from Japan. Her mother and grandmother survived the atomic bombings in Hiroshima. Her grandfather was killed. So we decided we were going to commemorate the 50th anniversary with 2 classes on campus, and we were going to take students to Japan, to Kyoto and Hiroshima that summer. But while she was in Japan making the plans, the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki asked if American University could take the artifacts that were supposed to go to the Smithsonian and display them at American University. So my Nuclear Studies Institute, with John's help on a daily basis, held the first exhibit that Hiroshima and Nagasaki ever did outside Japan at American University in 1995. And this was hugely controversial, but we did not get the kind of attack that the Smithsonian got from the Patriots and the Air Force Association and American Legion. But that's how we launched my Nuclear Studies Institute. And we went to Japan, we took the students there, and it was so successful that we decided we were going to continue this project. And between 1995 and 2019, I brought students to Hiroshima and Nagasaki every summer for 2 weeks, a 2-week study tour, which we travel with Japanese students, professor, and spent a lot of time with Hibakusha. Tanaka-san always speaks to our group. Setsuko, when she's in Hiroshima, speaks to our group. It's a wonderful program, the only program of this kind in the country. But since 1995, I've been researching and writing and speaking pretty much nonstop about nuclear issues. So John and I organized lots of symposium, lots of teach-ins here in New York in 2005, 50 Hibakusha there, big national conference. But in 2003, when they announced they were going to exhibit the Enola Gay at the Uvar-Hazy Annex out near Dulles Airport, John and I got together. We decided we would organize a national protest against that. I remember Tanaka-san was at that first meeting that we had, and some of you also were there. And there was a big debate about what to do because some of the Catholic workers said we should just oppose the exhibit. Said exhibiting the Enola Gay is like exhibiting gas chambers. We should oppose it on principle. And John and I argued against that position. We said what's crucial is that we use this to educate people, that the nuclear bomb is so atrocious, the Enola Gay's history so outrageous that we had to actually use this educationally. And so out of that came the national protest against the exhibit, also the National Education Committee that I founded along with John Dower, Mark Selden, and Akiba-san, the mayor of Hiroshima. So from there, we continue with these kinds of efforts, teach-ins and other efforts. And that also led directly into my project with Oliver Stone, The Untold History of the United States, which was a 12-part documentary film series and a series of books focused on, centered around nuclear history and the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So there's so much more I would like to say, but I do want to mention that one of the things that came out of this was my friendship with Tanaka-san. Now, John, for all of his great virtues, and they're unlimited, has one fault, and that's his pronunciation of Japanese. I thought Tanaka-san's name was pronounced Tanaka for years until I finally learned the correct pronunciation. But so trust John on everything nuclear, but not pronunciation of Japanese names or Japanese words. The only other point I want to make is that I annually nominate Miho Nadankyo for the Nobel Peace Prize. And I think we're going to win it a few years ago, except that they didn't want to insult the United States. So they gave it to ICANN instead, and ICANN was doing great work also. But Tanaka-san and Hidankyo and the Hibakusha certainly deserve the Nobel Peace Prize, and I hope that they win it this year or sometime very, very soon. Anyway, thank you.
Amen, Peter. So don't trust me on Japanese translation anymore. So let's move ahead. We have about 45 minutes left. We have a lot of people who want to speak, so let's be deferential. I want to ask David Sawyer to unmute, and David, you're going to say a few words, and then I think you're going to sing a song that was Louise's favorite song.
Yes.
David.
Hi, everybody. This has been very enjoyable. Just want to say this as an introduction to the song I'm going to sing. The United States of America in 2021 remains the only government that has used a nuclear weapon against another nation. Now, the problem with all wars is that they kill innocent people. The problem with nuclear weapons is that even testing them does irreparable harm to our shared planetary habitat. So I don't want any nation to possess a nuclear weapon, but the United States markets weapons and still maintains the readiness of enough megatonnage to completely obliterate this earth many times over. So then the United States has no integrity to demand that any nation not have a nuclear weapon until we relinquish ours and also stop marketing war in this world. I say that as someone who loves my country's possibilities more than I love its history. I love our possibilities of embarking upon a new era of life-affirming policies. Meanwhile, as Paul Robeson used to say, there's a balm in Gilead to make the wounded whole. There's a balm in Gilead to heal the sin-sick soul. Once when I was discouraged and thought my life in vain, that's when the people's spirit revived my soul again. There's a balm in Gilead to make the wounded whole. There's a balm in Gilead to heal the sin-sick soul. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, David. So David sang that song at Louise Franklin Ramirez Memorial. It was her favorite hymn, and thank you for sharing that with us, David.
Another thing I'd like to ask someone here about what happened, and I think, Peter, you mentioned something. I think I have about a minute left of my time, so I want to just wonder about this for a moment. I've always wondered what would have happened if Roosevelt or Truman at the time had gotten in touch with Japan and invited them to see the testing of the nuclear weapon at Los Alamos so that they could see and be warned instead of dropping this bomb on these thousands of innocent people who had nothing to do with fighting a war in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I just wonder
David,
what would have happened.
David, the sad truth is that Truman wanted to drop the bomb.
I know. Well, that's my
and that as Arjun, I think, or somebody mentioned earlier, the real target was not just the Japanese, the real target was the Soviets.
Right, it was to send a message.
Yes, and
but you
so
could have sent the message through Los Alamos by inviting people to a beautiful concert event, perhaps, and then have a blast, so to speak. But no, they decided that it was more important to victimize people than to demonstrate to people. They didn't do it to send a message. They sent it to kill people so the message would be the death itself. They didn't have to do that if all they wanted to do was send a message to discourage people from fighting wars against the United States of America. That's all they had to do.
So Arjun, maybe you'd like to comment on that briefly too. So you did a lot of research on that.
Yeah, actually, I'll put a link to a talk I gave 9 years ago called From Pearl Harbor to Hiroshima.
Yeah.
And, Peter mentioned that the bomb was supposed to be a deterrent about the Nazis. And actually the deterrent happened in a very peculiar way and was connected to the bombing of Japan eventually. In 1943, when they met in the first targeting decision, May 5th, 1943, they thought Germany has a lot of knowledge about fission. They have Werner Heisenberg, one of the greatest scientists of the 20th century. And if the bomb was a dud, if it did not work, then the Germans would be able to reverse engineer it and maybe use it in Europe, on England, for instance. And for the same reason at the time, actually, they did not target Japanese cities at first. They targeted the Japanese fleet in the Pacific island of Truk, so that if the bomb was a dud, it would sink. This was not a one-off decision. It was a technical decision that was also applied to other aspects. Like the proximity switch, which was an early smart bomb invented during World War II. And they only targeted Japanese cities in 1944, I think, when they were sure the bomb would work. Germany was actually never specifically targeted. They never had a list of cities. And Japan, Groves himself wrote, the target is and always has been Japan. That's close to the exact words on April 23rd, 1945, when they were preparing, he and Stimson were preparing a briefing of the Secretary of War so that he could go and talk to to Truman about the Manhattan Project, because Truman did not know about the bomb project, even as vice president. So the bombing of Japan and targeting of Japan is quite a complex history. And I wish that we would connect it more with Pearl Harbor, because Pearl Harbor was about oil. It was Japan wanting Indonesian oil and the Americans wanting to stop them, but nobody asked the Indonesians.
Thank you, Arjun.
Yeah, thank you, Arjun. So next, I'd like Rick Tingling Clemens, Rick and Michelle, if you would unmute. And Rick and Michelle have been members of the committee since the early days. And the great debt that we owe to Rick is that he's the one that reminded us that we cannot talk about nuclear weapons without talking about issues of social justice and broader issues and war in general, that all of these issues are linked. And Rick represented us, I believe, 5 times in Hiroshima, and his children also. And oftentimes he went at his own expense. So, Rick, I'd like you to briefly talk to the group, and Michelle, if you're there. Thank you. You have to unmute, Rick. Is Rick there, Jonah? Well, it looks like Rick may not be there, so we hope we'll get him back. So next I'd like to ask our brother Bob Brown with All African People's Revolutionary Party, GC. He's been an ally for the better part of 40 years, and I'd like to say him to say a few words about the link between imperialism and nuclear weapons and the global movement. So Bob, if you could speak briefly.
John.
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, on behalf of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, GC, we salute and we send the message of solidarity to the Hiroshima and Nagasaki Peace Committee on its 40th anniversary. We thank you, John, and the committee for inviting us to participate in this Zoom meeting. We seek to continue and expand our almost 4 decades old collaboration. We also take this occasion to renew our solidarity and support with the Japanese people, especially the Hibakusha, the Korean, and other victims of the US atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on 6-9 August 1945. We, as you know, are a small party, a revolutionary, a Pan-Africanist and internationalist and socialist organization. We are principled and uncompromising. We inherit and continue, though not exclusively, the revolutionary theory and practice of Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Ahmed Sekou Touré of Guinea, and Kwame Ture Stokely Carmichael. Equally, Michelle and Rick is there?
Yeah, we're here.
How you doing, fella?
I'm fine, man.
Okay, how do you want
Trying to
to proceed,
understand
John?
this new stuff that's out here.
I understand.
But is this you, Bob?
Yep.
How you doing, my brother?
I'm okay. I was in the middle of a presentation, so I don't know.
Well, go ahead, man. Go ahead and do your thing. But I gotta stay unmuted because I don't know how to unmute myself when I have to.
All right, let Bob finish, Rick, and then you're next. Okay, go ahead, Bob. Sorry about that.
As I was saying, we inherit and continue their revolutionary theory and practice. As many of the old timers know, it was Kwame Nkrumah and the Convention People Party of Ghana, and Ahmed Sekou Touré of the Democratic Party of Guinea, and Frantz Fanon and the Algerian National Liberation Front, who helped organize in collaboration with the Committee for Nonviolent Direct Action of Britain and the Water Resistance League, Bill Sutherland and other forces. They organized the protests against the French atomic tests in the late 1950s, 1960s in the Sahara. We inherit and we continue that and other work, too much to discuss now in this short time that we have. But more importantly, we continue our own revolutionary work. In my instance, for the last 58 years, I joined the movement in Chicago in 1963 at 15 years old, and I continue to make my small contributions to all the major struggles that have occurred in Chicago for the last almost 6 decades. African people worldwide and Japanese people share a common history and oppression. We also share common aspirations for the future, free from nuclear weapons and unjust wars. We can trace this history back 600, 800 years with the Portuguese and Spanish invasion of Africa, the Western Hemisphere, and Japan, and can see the beauty of this relationship between Japanese and Asian people and African people for 600, 800 years. Specifically, two Japanese, a Japanese American and a Japanese Canadian, went to Atlanta, Georgia in 1962 and walked into the headquarters of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and became the first two Japanese supporters, friends of the civil rights movement, of the student movement in the US. You also had Yuri Kochima, who had close relationships with Malcolm X. And even though there are some issues about the unknown side of his life, Aoki, who was the first field marshal of the Black Panther Party for self-defense in California. These are some of the connections between Japanese and African people in this country and worldwide. In 1966 to 1969, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee went to Japan. You had Ralph Featherstone, who became the National Program Secretary, who went with Howard Zinn for the event at the, I think it was Hiroshima Peace Memorial, the inauguration of the Peace Memorial. I believe it was in Hiroshima. In 1967, Cleve Sellers, who was the program secretary, co-leadership with Stokely Carmichael, went to Japan and spoke to the Gensuiko. By 68 or so, you had Eldridge Cleaver and Kathleen Cleaver and Big Man, who were invited to Cuba, to Japan. Again, that was Gensuiko. The various factions that at least aligned, there was a good relationship between sectors of the student movement in the United States and the student movement in Japan, despite the conflicts and issues. We seek to revitalize and renew the historical relationship we had with Gensuiko, with Zengakuren. Thanks to you and your committee, we have been introduced to Hadankyo. And as you know, several of the delegations that came to Washington, D.C. area, our party, as small and as poor as we are, hosted dinners and receptions to introduce them to sectors of the African community in D.C. that traditionally have not been involved in the Japanese struggle. We have met the Budoku Liberation League. We have met some of the Korean Association for Atomic Bomb Victims. And we have had the honor to meet Japanese movements and Japanese people at events and activities in every corner of the world. We don't want to take more time because there are so many people who have a right and have an obligation to make their voices heard. So we'll stop here and thank you again for inviting us.
Thank you, Bob. I'd just like to mention that one of the receptions that the All African People's Revolutionary Party organized was at Kamu Benjamin's house. And I will tell you, Bob, that the Bakasha told me later that was one of the most memorable and rewarding receptions that they'd ever experienced, because it introduced them to the true DC community. So we're ever grateful to you, Bob, and I'll pledge that we'll work together to reestablish those connections with Gensuikyo and other organizations. So thanks again. So Rick, I've already introduced you, Rick, so they know.
Hey, golly, I know I heard you.
Oh, all right, so it's your turn to talk now. So let's hear from Rick briefly, and then we've got about 10 other people I'm going to call on.
All right, hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. And I told John that 3 minutes was not anything that I could do anything with, but I'll try. And that is one of the main issues that I had with the Nagasaki Peace Committee, which I helped to form, was that there was a great deal of concern for what the US was going to do. And I came to the committee as members of organizations that does not respect capitalism, and definitely we are against imperialism, which the U.S. government used during the war that bombed Japan and is doing other stuff with its thousands of bases around the world. One of the things that I understood was that peace is not just the absence of war, but it's the presence of justice. So justice is what most of the human beings that I have met, and I've been all over the world, that I have met, only want justice. They want food, shelter, a job, a place to live, health care. That's the same thing that everybody wants. And that's what I wanted our organization to push forward and get other organizations that was trying to ask an imperialist to drop his gun. Now, how stupid can that be? The U.S. government is never going to drop nuclear weapons. They use that to bully the world with. Come on. And so I had some real disagreements. And I went back to where I think people need me, and there's poor people that needs poor people to fight for poor people. And when the Nagasaki Hiroshima want to deal with the poor and fight against capitalism, give me a call. Take care. Thank you. And thanks everybody for listening.
All right, thanks, Rick. Appreciate that. So Paul Magno, it was a reference earlier. Setsuko referred to the Catholic worker, and so Paul, maybe you can say a few words about Atlantic Life Community. Before you talk, though, we still have a lot of people on. So what we're going to do is we're going to end the formal program at 9 o'clock because we promised that, but we're going to hold the meeting open. So those who want to stay 30 minutes later, we'll keep recording that and we'll be able to show some more pictures and get everybody in. So I want to alert everyone that the formal meeting's going to end at 9. We'll announce that, but we'll keep the meeting open so that everybody gets a chance to speak. So Paul, you're on.
Thank you very much. I live here in Washington, D.C. and have been walking alongside or being helped along the way by the Hiroshima Nagasaki Committee for all these 40 years or so, which has been a wonderful thing. Part of the Catholic worker movement and what used to be called anyway the Catholic left, and one thing that I want to uphold tonight is the tradition of faith-based nonviolent resistance, not appealing to the masters of the world and the masters of war, but resisting them through risky, self-sacrificial nonviolence. And I'm thinking primarily of the Plowshares movement, which I've been blessed to be part of for the last 4 decades, as a supporter, as an actor, as a prisoner. And I want to thank the Hiroshima and Nagasaki Committee for a couple of things, including always putting in a good word for the people who have done these Plowshares actions and spent time in jail. And that's been over 100 actions, mostly in the United States, but around the world, where people walk into a weapon site or a war plant and take out hammers and put some dents in nuclear weapons, which is something up until the first action in 1980, certainly the governments of the world had never done. People then spend time. I spent a year and a half in federal prison, half of a 3-year sentence. And among the first people to see me when I came back to Washington after my family and my Catholic worker community were the folks of the Hiroshima Nagasaki Committee. And I won't forget that. One vignette from today is Ellen Thomas goes into her trove of pictures every couple of years and sends me a picture of my 2 daughters as children. And she did that today in anticipation of tonight. And what she sent was a picture of Sarah and Ariel with Louise Franklin Ramirez, the mother of the Hiroshima Nagasaki Committee, and so many other good things. So that was just a delight to see. Right now, to get back to the Plowshares movement, there are 5 Plowshares folks in prison for their action at Kings Bay, Georgia in April of 2018. On the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination, they went into the submarine base there, confronted the Trident nuclear weapon system, which is the most treacherous weapon system ever built. It can burn down the planet all by itself in a matter of hours. And consequently, they went to trial, and presently 5 of them are in federal custody, in prison or in halfway houses. And they represent a long tradition that's only one part of a very diverse movement for justice in the world. And I think what you've heard John say repeatedly, what Rick just said, is that you don't isolate one issue from the other. These issues, and the Hiroshima Nagasaki Committee has reminded lesser lights in the movement about this very frequently in Washington, at least, and globally, that all these issues are united. Martin Luther King talked about the triple evils, and so the intersectionality of empire has been around for quite some time, and it's quaint to touch it, and it's pitiful that it's been 54 years since Martin Luther King uttered those words, and we still have yet to grasp the concept and build a not just a protest movement, not just an advocacy movement, but a resistance movement that takes those systems apart. Very much in the words that Reverend Daughtry shared before he had to leave tonight. Swords into plowshares, dismantle every violence in the world. And you have to do it through risk and sacrifice. At least that's what we've learned and practiced over the last 40 years in the Plowshares movement. And I thank all of you who have walked with us. And I'm really grateful to the Hiroshima Nagasaki Committee for keep pointing back to the people who take those risks and make those sacrifices. God bless everyone.
So Alan Hengst has his hand up, and I know that he has bandwidth issues. So Alan, if you could briefly talk to the group. Alan is a long-time, old-time member from the early days. Alan?
John, my bandwidth issues have been resolved. I've not only got a new computer, I've got a new router, which was the key. So I've been here the whole time. I'm going to make my remarks as briefly as I can. I hope I don't break down, because this has been a very emotional experience for me. I'm 72, and I was the circulation manager at American University's Law Library from 2000 to 2014. I'm also the editor of the Weapons of Mass Destruction in DC photo blog, and I will put all these remarks in the chat room. So let me just rip right through them. I still have vivid memories of Louise facilitating seemingly endless HNPC work sessions at Calvary Baptist Church on 8th Street in downtown DC. Usually after an hour or two of work, I was more than ready to go home and relax. Nevertheless, I was amazed to learn that Louise was only just getting started, and after our sessions was actually planning to participate in yet another meeting of the Grey Panthers. I just wanted to testify about the remarkable epiphany that I experienced at St. Aloysius Church on May 6, 2010, at an event sponsored by Pax Christi. That night, I met with a small group of Hibakusha and approximately 150 members of the Gensuko delegation, who had just returned from touring the Enola Gay exhibit near Chantilly, Virginia. The delegation was led around our area in several large buses by you, John, and the HNPC. Since reading John Hershey's classic account of Hiroshima as a teenager, I've always admired the endurance of the remaining survivors of the only atomic bombings in history. Needless to say, intellectual familiarity and face-to-face contact are two very different things. During the meeting that night, we took time to formally apologize to one another. They first for attacking the United States at Pearl Harbor, and then the Americans that were present apologized for dropping the atomic bombs on Japan. I'm not a psychiatrist, so it's still impossible for me to explain how this simple exchange affected my entire demeanor. Suffice it to say that the chronic, free-floating anger that I'd carried around since the late 60s had completely vanished. Listening to the personal stories of two victims and reading through the Jacinko literature, I was awestruck by a startling revelation. These tragic victims didn't have a single vindictive or vengeful bone in their bodies. In fact, at no point did they even refer to the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki as war crimes per se, or even sins, but instead called them mistakes, albeit terrible ones. By the time I got home that night, I understood that if these victims of war could forgive me and my countrymen, that I had no right to be angry with anyone. And I'll put these remarks in the chat room. I'm done.
Thank you, Alan. So I'd like to call next on MJ Park. MJ and Jerry, her husband Jerry, run Little Friends for Peace. And we have partnered how many years? 35 years. They working with Joe Butler, with Nick Umba. So MJ, can you say a few words, please?
Thank you, John. Thank you to everyone. It too is a memorable evening to think back, listening to Paul share about Ariel and Sarah, who have been part of Little Friends for Peace. And I just today did an outdoor peace camp and told the story of Sadako. And some of the kids were, why would anyone go to war? Why would anyone hurt animals and flowers? And why would anyone hate and hurt people? So LFFP has tried to eradicate, interrupt, and eliminate this violence that all of you here are working on by teaching peace. And many of you know that way back when Louise and John were focusing on toys that were put under the Christmas tree, that were little weapons that were equipping children with, oh, they're just toys. But Louise would not have it. And we joined in going to the toy stores and doing peace workshops and inviting kids into creating new toys that were more about caring and sharing and loving people. So my commitment has been to continue to plant seeds of peace and to help interrupt this violence. Now to hear of gun violence in our own city streets and how we need to find a way to get to what Gandhi said, violence will end where love begins. Start loving ourselves and loving others. Today, I missed the survivors coming to Peace Camp to share their stories, because I can go on with how many, not only kids, but counselors have been moved by the testimony, by the witness of the survivors. And the biggest part was their call for friendship. Forgiveness, friendship, and let's find a way to work together. So I'm celebrating tonight. My own granddaughter is sitting in front of me who had never heard the story. She's from Mexico. And today she said, you know, we need to stop that. And she's been drawing pictures and writing notes. So I join with all of you in this commitment to continue, and I bond with the Catholic worker and all those who have shown us how important it is to stand up and be a witness. And thank you, Alan, for bringing up St. Aloysius. I was part of the Pax Christi group, and it gets very emotional to think back to those days. And I had a little circle, and Sarah Magno was a little camper who was adamant that we needed to go to the White House and share this story and find a way to have our government not have a Department of Defense, but a Department of Peace. So I celebrate, I recommit, I dedicate, and I bond, and I also thank all of you for being a witness. And Luis Presente.
Yeah. Luis Presente. So thank you, MJ. So I'm going to call on Alice Slater. So Alice is, in a real sense, the mother of the Abolition 2000 movement. And I've known Alice for, I guess, 25 or 30 years. And our committee has worked with her for many years, especially organizing the big international peace events at the UN. So briefly, Alice, will you say a few words?
Thank you. It's so moving to hear everybody's testimony. And I have to admit, I have this sadness, like we've all been doing so much for so long and we seem to be on a treadmill. And my latest kick is that we have to change the conversation, how we talk about nuclear weapons. We have to get ahead of the soundtrack. I just read this article about peace washing, about greenwashing, like they're peace washing. They're stepping on the message. I mean, here we got this ban treaty and they're talking about no first use. We're not talking about get rid of the bombs. So there's right now in Congress, Eleanor Holmes Norton has a resolution, HR 2850, Nuclear Abolition and Economic and Energy Conversion Act. And she's asking for the government to join this new ban treaty and get rid of the bombs. And I put up a list. I work with World Beyond War. It's quite a good group because we're saying you can't just get rid of the bomb or this war or that. We got to get rid of the whole war system, as so many of you know in your hearts, especially the plowshare people. And we've had a plowshares action in Tennessee. A lot of our New York friends went to jail, Carmen Trotter, and anyway. So I'd like to read this out and let you reflect on it, and maybe it can go in, but I wrote this call to change the public conversation, 10 urgent steps for nuclear abolition. Because we're always hearing about steps and the steps are going nowhere. And here's the steps that I think we should be calling for. 1, stop making new weapons. 2, institute a moratorium on any new weapons, laboratories, delivery systems. I mean, Obama voted $1 trillion, and Bush and Biden upped it. These guys are still working on new weapons all the time. No refurbishing or modernization of old weapons. Let them rust in peace. Immediately separate all nuclear bombs from their missiles, as China does. Take up repeated offers from Russia and China. I've heard them over and over again, to Clinton, to Obama, to Trump, to Biden, to negotiate treaties to ban space weapons and cyber war. You know, Putin made an offer to Obama after the America boasted how we in Israel knocked down Iran's uranium plant with the Stuxnet virus. Putin called on Obama, said, let's do a cyber war treaty. We said no. The US says no to all of this. We are totally in the grip of Eisenhower's military industrial complex. Okay, so take up those offers to ban space weapons, reinstate the ABM treaty. We walked out of it. And we're putting missiles in Romania and Poland. How are we ever going to negotiate for nuclear disarmament if we're in this kind of aggressive posture? And take those missiles out of Romania and Poland. Take our nuclear missiles from NATO bases in Germany, Holland, Belgium, Italy, and Turkey. Do you believe this? We have nuclear weapons in those countries right near Russia's border. And sign the new treaty to ban the bomb for the prohibition of nuclear weapons, and take up Russia's offers. These came from Gorbachev, it came from Putin, to Obama, to Clinton, to Reagan, to reduce the US and Russian nuclear arsenals. There are now 13,000 in them. All the other countries only have 1,000 between them. Reduce them to 1,000 and call all the other nations to the table to negotiate for the total elimination of nuclear weapons, as we promised to do in 1970 in the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And I just think we have to get this new language out there. There's like a lot of talk, end this missile, end this use, do this. Like, let's say stop making them, you know, let's really change the way we speak. Thank you.
All right, so I want to recognize Shizumi Minale. Shizumi was largely responsible for the restoration of the Honkawa children's drawings and publicizing it through an important movie. So Shizumi, can you speak? And then after you, what we're going to do is extend the program for another half hour, but I know that our interpreters are going to need to stop at some point. So let's have Shizumi speak, and then we can go into the extended program. Shizumi?
それでは、しずみさんのを最後に、放課後としたいと思います。こんにちは、聞こえますか？来れて。
In Hiroshima actually after World War II, but my mom was there, and she was a school teacher during the time, but she taught the students from Hiroshima city outside of the Hiroshima, so that many students were evacuated from Hiroshima city. So that my mom was a teacher at all the students who were evacuated. So she told me the story from her, experiences. Being a teacher, and she discovered that her students' family house were gone on August 5th. She had to deal with these children, how she can explain to them about what happened. So that she told me, still, even though in the 70 years later, she still cried and telling the story about wish. She said the kids were in a city and they died with family, instead just left alone with a lot of sadness. But she had to think they survived. How I can teach them as an educator, how they can keep up the belief in hope, and then that's all she had to deal with in a lot of struggle to teaching these children. And they end up, she took some of the students to her own family in the farm town to care of them a little while until some things in a little better situation. So that really inspired me to deal with the people who are survivors from atomic bomb, because I came to America and then studied. I'm a theater artist, dance theater artist. And then first time and I met the Hibakusha in 1985 in the Bay Area. At the time, there is a San Francisco Bay Area Hibakusha Peace and group. So they told me to help the fundraising for the how we can maintain to keep them to traveling to America to share their testimony. So as a me performer, what I can do, because I was also poor student too. So, but what I can do was I can perform and then get a little money, and that money I can give to you. So that was began to I
Shizumi, we've lost you. You've lost your connection. Your screen is frozen. We can't hear you.
And should I do? I'm happy God. Hello?
Yes, you are freezing. Your screen is freezing.
I can hear.
Shizumi,
Anyway,
Shizumi, shut down your screen.
So Shizumi, Jonah, mute Shizumi because we need to move on. All right. Shizumi,
may I make a suggestion, John?
Yes.
If Shizumi will turn off her video, we probably will be able to understand her.
Yeah. So Shizumi, turn your video off because you're freezing, and you probably need to wrap it up in about a minute because we have limited time and other people need to speak. So I'm gonna.
Yeah, turn off your video. Yeah, and then you don't not mute yourself. Turn your video off. Okay. All right, let's move on, John.
All right, so then let's go on. I want to ask Diane Dorigo to say a few words. Diane works with Nuclear Information Resource Service. She's been an important part of our commemoration for, I would say, at least 30 years. And
I came to DC in 1986 and have been at every commemoration that we've held in which I've been in town. And I'm very honored to be part of this group and wanted to, I know we're really short on time, and I was going to say a few memories. One with Louise is that we worked very hard in the 80s and early 90s to put together, she worked very hard to put together a map of all of the nuclear facilities in North America, and at least in the United States. And it was an amazing, it's still never been topped. That map is still something that we share and we use, and it's one of Louise's things that she had to make happen, and we greatly appreciate it. The connections between the nuclear weapons and the nuclear power fights have always been, I mean, basically it's one monster with two heads. And what I've shared usually at these commemorations is what is the latest action effort to fight back the nuclear power and waste, and the waste from both weapons and power getting recycled into consumer goods and deregulated. And we've also fought together on weakening radiation standards, which are so immorally based on the Hiroshima Nagasaki studies. It's something we, I believe, need to be apologizing for even those studies. The National Academy of Sciences right now is setting up a new low-dose radiation committee. It's got about 20 members. One we know is a really someone who will not work for the public good. And so I am putting together a letter. We'll have it to submit to try to get him off this committee. If there are any organizations on this Zoom, please send me your emails or put it in the chat, and I'll get you the comments, and we can try to straighten out this committee. We have in the past affected what the National Academy of Sciences has done. It's been very crooked on radiation issues, and we need to prevent them from doing another disservice. So the gatherings are important. The work is important, and the commemorations with both of our countries have been very heartening. The commemorations and the efforts that we've waged together. So thank you for including Nuclear Information and Resource Service and me in these commemorations every year.
Thank you, Diane. So I'd like to call on Kevin Camps, Beyond Nuclear, and Kevin also has played an important role and an analogous role, I think, to Dee, slightly different. So Kevin, can you say a few words?
Thanks, John. So when I was still in Michigan before I moved to take a job at NEARS back in 1999, John and Louise came through Kalamazoo, where I had a Peace and Justice Center, with their incredible map that was a touchstone for my early anti-nuclear activism and so many others. And, you know, blessed us with their message, continued the tour throughout Michigan and the Midwest. So that's how we first met. And then when I moved here to DC, we began to work together and I started attending the commemorations. And Peter Kuznick mentioned the 2003 conference and the unveiling of the Enola Gay. And I had Japanese neighbors in Mount Rainier, Santana, who was a part of the committee's work. And so I got asked, because I had a big car at the time, to drive several habakasha out to the unveiling of the Enola Gay for the protest. And I was standing with a woman who had seen the Enola Gay as a little girl before it dropped the bomb, as it was dropping the bomb on her hometown. And now she was seeing it again. And she was physically trembling. And just to make it worse, there were veterans of World War II, VFW, their hat said, who just rubbed salt in the wounds. They said nasty things as they saw us standing there. So as Setsuko said earlier, the happy memories, the sad memories, also powerful. And something that was very meaningful to me was when the committee gave me the Josephine Butler Award in July of 2010. I was about to go to Japan on a speaking tour and I felt intimidated. Why do they want me to come there, you know? And it gave me some confidence going there. And my first stop after Tokyo was Fukushima Daiichi. This was August of 2010. It was actually Hiroshima Day. And all of the people I met 7 months later, scores of people would become nuclear evacuees to this day because of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear catastrophe. And like Diane said, John would ask me to come to the commemorations after that to give updates on Fukushima, which became such a huge part of our work. And when I saw the date for this event tonight, I talked to John and asked if I could say a little bit, and Arjun's already spoke eloquently about the Trinity commemoration from 1945 and the amazing work of the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium, Tina Cordova, trying to get Radiation Exposure Compensation Act coverage for those communities. And another July 16th in New Mexico I wanted to touch on. I saw that Ace Hoffman put it in the chat, but the Church Rock uranium mill tailings spill, one of the worst radiological catastrophes in US history, only it happened to the Navajo Dene, so most people haven't even heard of it. But the Redwater Pond Road community, this Navajo Dene community, lives in that contamination to this day. They live surrounded by 3 Superfund sites, the worst of the worst, uranium mining and milling Superfund sites. And then another July 16th that I wanted to mention was in 2018 when Holtec International and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission teamed up for this license application to move all of the high-level radioactive waste from the commercial nuclear power industry into southeastern New Mexico. And I've got my t-shirt on that was designed by, I'll show it to everybody, was designed by Noel Marquez with Alliance for Environmental Strategies. So the fight is on. Satsuko mentioned the Nuclear Regulatory Commission historian, and that was ghoulish tone deafness by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to announce in the Federal Register the license application for this high-level radioactive waste dump on the July 16th anniversary dates back in 2018. So that's a lot of what I had to say, and I thank you for the honor of speaking.
So Kevin and Diane as well, we've had some discussion about possibly sending Larry King to Hiroshima and Nagasaki next summer if the conference is held. And Larry is one of the surviving more modern uranium miners. So I'm going to be talking with both of you about possibly sending him as part of a delegation next year, because I think that we in the global north have a responsibility to help our sisters and brothers in the global south. So let's be in touch on that. So I want to ask next, we only have about 15 minutes, and at some point we have to drop things. So I'm going to call on Max Abashevsky. Is Max still there?
I'm very happy to be on this momentous occasion. What you're doing is fabulous because you're recording history, and we have to record it ourselves. We can't depend on others. But I'm also very jealous because in Baltimore, we're only going to be doing our 37th commemoration on August 6th and 9th. And in Baltimore, we have Johns Hopkins University. It's the #1 school of mass destruction. And if people have been following this, they just received a $530 million nuclear weapons contract with the Air Force, amongst all the other contracts they have. So we have our work cut out in Baltimore. We encourage anybody to join us in all of our activities. We did take the ban treaty to the president's house on January 22nd earlier this year. But I first met Ms. Thurlow at the Udvar-Hazy Museum in Virginia. And it's just, as Kevin mentioned, it was a similar situation. Can you imagine being a hibakusha and you're actually seeing this monstrosity? And we were there protesting because they're not telling the truth about what's going on. Another issue that was mentioned was the protest at the Smithsonian. There were several protests, and this particular one that I was at, handing out leaflets, holding a sign, Peter Jennings came over and interviewed me. And I brought up El Perovich's book, The Atomic Diplomacy. He and I had a chat about this. He seemed sympathetic. The other issue I wanted to mention was when John brought, August of 2019, John and others brought to Baltimore at Homewood Friends Meeting House, where we're meeting again this year, 2 Korean women. And if I have the story correct, and John will add to it, these 2 Korean women, I was told, were probably comfort women, using that particular pejorative. And John had told me that they had not been participating. They would come to the gatherings, but they weren't sharing any stories or anything. But for whatever reason, that August, I believe it was the 9th, in Baltimore in 2019, both of the Korean women asked to speak. And it was a very, very, very moving situation in the library at Homewood Friends meeting that night. We also went out to dinner later, is whenever the hibakusha and John and others come up to Baltimore, we always go out to dinner in the evening. But one of the last things I'll say is everyone comes up to me after these events, and they see the hibakusha, and it's been mentioned earlier, there's no animosity. There's none of that anger that I've ever noticed in any of them. They're always very humble. And to me, people will tell me it's a spiritual happening, and I hope we can do it again sometime in the future. And thank you for my opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Max. I'd like to call on Leslie Suzanne. Leslie's dad was the one who directed the filming, Technicolor filming of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that was used in the film Prophecy, and she's worked closely with our committee for a long time. Leslie? You have to unmute.
You would think we'd have learned it by now with all the pandemic, but I still do it. So I wanted to thank you all for joining today to celebrate the 40 years in the struggle to rid our planet of the looming threat of nuclear holocaust, and particularly for the work here in Washington, D.C., where the decision was made to use nuclear weapons in war for the first and, God willing, last time in history. As others have said, we in America have a special duty as a result of that to prevent the error from being repeated, as it says on the cenotaph in Hiroshima. My connection to this issue, and especially to Hiroshima, actually began 75 years ago before I was born, when my father was assigned to a strategic bombing survey film crew that took the only color film footage of the aftermath of the atomic bombings in both cities. Those films were suppressed by the US government as top secret, along with black and white footage that was seized from Japanese filmmakers. My father was haunted for the rest of his life by the images of what he saw there. His last wish was to have his ashes scattered at Ground Zero in Hiroshima, and he was never able, after fighting for years, to get access to his films until a Japanese group organized, heard from him about their existence and organized something called the 10-Foot Campaign that was able to get the films declassified and buy a print. And it was from that print that Prophecy and Lost Generation were made. They also tracked down survivors who appeared in the footage. After my father's death, I lived in Hiroshima, and I interviewed and came to know quite well many of the hibakusha whom he had filmed. John and Louise and the DC Hiroshima Nagasaki Peace Committee encouraged and supported me from the beginning in this work. I was one of the founders, as I said in the chat, of the Grey Panthers. So that was a connection born even before the committee was formed. And I have always been grateful to the committee for the many ways it's fought for peace, including showing the footage from my father's filmings to people as part of the broader mission. It took me more than 30 years, but I finally published a book, including the photos and stories of my father and the survivors, in time for the 75th anniversary last year. I wish that I could say that all of our work has resulted in the elimination of nuclear weapons, but what I can say is that the continued dedication of anti-nuclear activists like John and like all of you who have given such moving testimony today continues to give me hope for our future and for our children's future.
Thank you, Leslie. So next I'd like to call on Gwen Dubois. And Gwen, I think you have a PowerPoint, so you want to do screen sharing while you're talking?
Okay, let's try to do this.
Should work. So while she's doing that, Gwen has kind of pulled together the Prevent Nuclear War Maryland group, and our committee for the last 3 or 4 years has been working closely with them as part of that coalition, and I think it's been a very fruitful partnership. Gwen, go ahead.
Can you see?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So yeah, thank you, John and Max, for bringing to Baltimore the hibakusha and the events that we've seen since I got here in 1984, and maybe that early. But after being involved in a workshop that PSR did in Baltimore, we put together Prevent Nuclear War Maryland with a few different peace groups, and our mission, as you can see here, is to abolish nuclear weapons, but also to educate, to change policy, and to do what we can do in Maryland. And again, John's represented the Hiroshima and Nagasaki Peace Committee. of the National Capital Area. It's been a great collaboration. This was a symposium we put on at Goucher in 2018, 2 minutes to midnight, what we can do to prevent nuclear war. And we did it at Goucher to try to reach young people. We only had about 8 or 10 Goucher students. It was a great presentation, and that continues to be a challenge to get young people involved. In August, Prevent Nuclear War Maryland was successful in getting Baltimore to be the first major city to pass a Back from the Brink resolution. And Max was very helpful. His council person, Bill Henry, was a student for social responsibility. I don't know if you can see this, he's right there. He's now the controller, and he helped us make this happen. And then shortly after that, in 2019, this Washington, D.C. was the first national capital, not only to pass a Back from the Brink resolution, but also to state support for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And there's David Grosso, who was a city councilman. And I have to think that the work of the Hiroshima Nagasaki Peace Committee in DC sowed the seeds. They helped make this possible. These are the elements of Back from the Brink. And we now have 57 cities and cities, counties, and towns, and 2 states, California and Oregon, who've signed on. And the present campaign is to get 250 local leaders, political leaders, to elected officials to sign this letter that's going to go to Biden. And we hope to influence the nuclear posture review, which sets nuclear policy for the United States. It may be tinkering at the edges, but it would be nice if we could renounce, all these things: presidential use, first use. Most will only get nuclear weapons off hair trigger alert. We now have 150 local officials from 29 states who've signed on, including 18 from Maryland. On January 22nd, we were at Hopkins, and this is really important. As Max said, they're the biggest, they have the biggest contract with the Defense Department of any university. And they just got another $500 million to work on mostly the land-based weapons of the triad. And maybe, we can debate whether they're the most dangerous because they are on hair trigger alert. And I want to say that with John Steinbeck, we've collaborated on a movie series, and we hope Threads is next. But every time we see one of these movies and have one of these wonderful discussions, including the history of anti-nuclear protests and abolition work, I think we all learn a lot. So thank you very much. Thank you for everything you've done. You've helped keep my education alive and real. Thank you.
So the next movie is going to be Atomic Cafe. We have a little
little
bit of black humor before we go to Threads, because Threads is pretty grim. So, all right. So we have about 5 minutes left, and I don't want to go too long because I need to get up in fact, my alarm is set for 5 o'clock. So I want to call on Pat Elder next, and then I'm going to basically ask Alan Thomas to finish up, and then Mel, if you want to say some closing words. So Pat, you've been waiting patiently. Pat's been involved for a really long time with the Die-In for Peace. I think you were part of that. So talk about your memories.
Well, I think I worked first with the committee in '03 on the unveiling of the Enola Gay, and just thinking what an abomination it was. 40 years is a long time. Moses had finished his wandering in that time. So I'm honored. But what I want to talk about is how, even when we lay down our sword and shield, down by the riverside, we may be leaving our poisons behind. The U.S. Air Force and the Marines have poisoned, in this case, Okinawa's water and fish with massive releases of PFAS. Those are per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. Now it's the Army's turn in Okinawa, and last month they they contaminated Okinawan waters with 2,400 liters of these firefighting foams. And the Okinawa Defense Bureau says the toxic materials flowed out of the base due to heavy rain. It's a fairly common occurrence. The substance PFAS is used in the military's firefighting foam. It flows into rivers and it contaminates fish. People eat the fish. And this stuff's been linked to many types of cancers and fetal abnormalities, childhood diseases. It just never goes away and it bioaccumulates. What's interesting is that it was, it was first developed by American scientists and then further refined through the Manhattan Project. And Professor Kuznick mentioned that nuclear fission was discovered in 1938 by German scientists, but at the same time, DuPont chemists were discovering PFAS. Both are existential threats to humanity. And so wherever there are nuclear bombs, there is PFAS and the rivers are poisoned. Buchel, Germany comes to mind. Poisonous releases of toxic chemicals by the US military are commonplace in US bases in Germany, the Japanese mainland, and Okinawa. I'll cut it here. My hat's off to you all, but don't forget these forever chemicals and how they are linked to nuclear weaponry. Thank you.
So I'm going to turn it over to Ellen Thomas and Jonah if you want to say a few words. But before that, I want to recognize somebody who is still on the call, and that is Yuki Sato.
Yeah.
I mentioned back in '95 that she worked on behalf of the committee to organize an enormous delegation of A-bomb survivors that went to about 10 states working with Peace Action. And I know that Yuki has some health issues and she may not want to say anything, but I want to recognize her. And she's still a volunteer in Japan with the peace movement there. So Yuki, a lot of what we've done over the years, is you were an important part of that. So I'd like to, Jonah, would you like to say something? Jonah is the co-producer and Ellen Thomas is the co-producer. And we've spent a lot of time over the last few weeks organizing this meeting, trying to make it glitch-free, and I think we succeeded pretty well. So Jonah, you first, and then Ellen, and then Mel, maybe you could close us out.
Yeah, thanks, John. This is a pretty incredible view of 40 years. I wanted to bring up briefly one memory of the many times I've collaborated with this committee. After we did the commemoration in Washington with two hibakusha from Japan. At the time, Billy Tyak of the Piscataway Nation in Maryland was still holding the Sundances, which I've spoken with people talking about this since then, and they're very surprised that there was anything like this going on in the East. It's mostly associated with Western, the Western people, Western part of the United States, where the Sundance is a very important ritual. And so Billy Tyak invited the committee and the visitors to the final parts of this Sundance. And it was an eye opener for me. It was of all the different events that we've been part of here, this was one of the most memorable because it joined many different issues related to the oppression of people that was talked about earlier, and how Native Americans have been a big part of that. And to me, there was a lot of healing going on during that ceremony and the socializing afterwards. And I think this has also been a theme I've heard tonight, that it's possible to get beyond the anger and the hatred, and we might be able to succeed if we can do this more to heal our wounds. And I think that was going on at that day in Southern Maryland at the Piscataway Nation. So thanks. That's all I wanted to say right now.
Ellen, will you want to say a few words?
Yes.
And thank you for the wonderful photos. That we'll put them up on the website as well.
Yeah, I'll run when this is over. I'll just go ahead and run them, and when we put it up, then if people want to just look at the pictures, they can go to the end. So this has been wonderful for me to listen to all these stories and to remember so much. And I first came in touch with John and Louise in 1984 after I joined the vigil in front of the White House that started the same year that John and Louise started. And Joe Butler started the Hiroshima Nagasaki Peace Committee. And they immediately embraced me, and Joe Butler in particular, and Louise, of course, and John, of course, but Joe Butler in particular took me under her wing. And first thing she did was she took me over to the annual meeting of the Green Party and had me sign up, and then immediately went in and suggested that nominated me to be an at-large delegate to the Green Party. And I did it for a year, and it was wonderful. It was a very intelligent way to introduce me to the community. And when we started working on Proposition 1, the Hiroshima Nagasaki Committee was very much our ally. And Joe Butler, again, she got up and gave speeches all over town, and Hilda Mason and supported it, and she was in the DC Council, and we just collaborated, and we had a lot of fun doing it too. You know, a lot of people joined the committee through the vigil, and with the Catholic workers, the Dorothy Day Catholic workers, and the Atlantic Life community, we're just a family. And I feel so blessed to have been part of this family. And I love you all.
Thank you, Ellen. So Mel, will you take us home? And then I think that after Mel, we're just going to run some photos for maybe about 10 minutes if people want to watch it, but I think we'll end the spoken part now. So Mel, can you take us home?
Yeah, and thank you. Thanks to everyone who presented tonight. I may come to this community later than your experience, but I have benefited much from listening to your stories, not only tonight, but over time. What I think is common amongst all the recitations tonight is the fundamental and foundational predisposition that every one of you has to the humanitarian impulses for the human betterment of others. And that is very significant. So we can talk about these major domestic and geopolitical issues, but what unites us is that caring, and that's what fuels the work. There is so much of what we think is this work that sometimes we can't see the end point, but the end point is the journeying together in a community so that we can be effective and catalyze the change that we want. In this instance, it is the abolition of nuclear weapons. It is nuclear weapons abolition. And through all of the techniques that we've heard about, all the history that we've learned, but human flourishing and human betterment is our dedication. And I thank you for allowing me to participate in this community. I'm honored by it, and I wish all of us well and continued work in this struggle.
All right, thank you, Mel. So Ellen's going to show some photos now. So I just want to say good night to everybody because I need to get up early. So I'm going to leave it going for another 10 minutes or so. So Ellen, can you run the photos? And good night, everybody.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Bye. Good night, John.
Have a great night, John.
Maybe everybody can mute now.
Kevin says he's not seeing the screen. Is there anybody else that has that problem? Not seeing the
I'm just seeing
slides?
3 pictures. It's not changing.
Right, it's the
Really?
same 3 pictures.
Oh my gosh.
They're lovely pictures, but they're little.
Yeah, well, that's pretty boring, huh?
And I'm still here, but we're seeing thumbnails, so probably you can do the view and make them bigger, but we see your screen. It's just,
Well, is that bottom one John and Kitty with Louise?
All right, let me see what I can do here and stop this and see what's going on. I don't understand this.
no, we saw your screen fine, so.
No, we only saw 3 pictures though. It wasn't changing.
It
Yeah.
was changing for me. I don't understand it.
Ellen, could you back out and try it again? That's worked for me sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So the problem is getting it to start. It's a slideshow and it takes over the screen. Is it? Can anybody tell me how I can make it not take over my screen?
Well, you know, we want it to take over your screen.
Yeah, so we can see it.
It's screen sharing.
Yeah, but I can't share it. I have to, all right, I have to start. Which 3 had you already seen? The first 3?
Well, Ms. Inouye was part of it. I was away from the screen. I didn't realize it wasn't moving.
Oh, gosh.
Because I've seen them all, so. but
Okay.
others want to see it. And we are recording, by the way, so hello, recording.
Yeah, I'll have to cut this. Oh, goodness. Sorry about this, folks.
So just bring it up on your screen, come back to Zoom and hit screen sharing, and
Yeah, I
that
can't come back to Zoom. Once it starts once it starts happening.
well, you're right there now. We see it perfectly.
Okay, so
Different ones.
So scroll it. Maybe you can make it a bigger view and see. Yeah, that's fine.
No, there's 4.
Slideshow. Yep, there you go.
now. Did that change?
No, but I mean, it works. Can you scroll down?
No. It's working for me, but it's not working for you. So I don't know. I'll put it into the video. I promise. I'll get them all into the
The
video.
workaround is going to be that a lot of these photographs are already on the committee website. So just go to HiroshimaPeaceCommittee.net and go to the history, and then you'll see most of them. So.
And we can put the Dropbox link into the chat. Let me look it up.
Okay, so I still got it open. I've not saved the chat yet, but like I said, my alarm is at 5 and I'm thinking about making it 4:45. So I need to get out of here pretty quick.
Well, I'm host, so you can leave when you need to. And I think I'm going to stop the recording if everybody is okay with that. We can.
Yeah, I think that's good.
We can still talk.
And you can always edit, the end of it out.
Right. And I will. I promise.
I know you will.